Hafade, welcome to the Guam Congress building, and thank you, and welcome to Guam. And we have Dr. Jeff Waxman of the Program Manager, Strategic Capabilities Office. And if you would introduce your team, I would.
Sure, yes. So as mentioned, Madam Speaker, I'm Jeff Waxman from the Strategic Capabilities Office, Department of Defense. And with me is my technical advisor, John Mendenhall.
Mr. Mendenhall, welcome. So with me today, I'm Speaker Teresa Lahi. I have Senator Chris Barnett, Senator Jesse Lujan, and Senator Joanne Brown. And we have staff from some of the other senators who are also present with us today. All right. And walking in is Senator Sabina Paris. And so I think audio also has your slides whenever you are ready to do that.
Sure, I'm happy to run through the slide deck, and if it's all right with the senators, I can pause every couple slides for questions. Does that work? Okay. Next slide, please. Project Pele is a transportable micronuclear reactor producing 1 to 5 megawatts of net electrical power for 3 years. It comes out of a 2016 Defense Science Board study. We are incorporating a brand. Oh, not close enough? Okay, sure. So it incorporates a brand new nuclear fuel called AGR triso fuel. We did a reactor design competition that kicked off in March of 2020. We have selected BWXT as the prime contractor, as the winner of that competition. We have begun fabricating the fuel. We have begun purchasing long lead hardware. And we are in the process of finalizing the engineering design and submitting to the regulator for approval. And we anticipate that we will hopefully have the reactor assembled and delivered to Idaho in mid-2025. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Waxman. So I'd like to introduce Senator Dwayne St. Nicholas. And senators, are we okay to continue? All right, please continue. Sorry about that.
Sure thing. No problem. So this fuel, triso fuel, has been developed by the Department of Energy. They've spent about $400 million developing it since 2002. The premise is that rather than having one large containment vessel for the reactor, you have millions of tiny, tiny containment vessels. So each of those little spheres is its own containment, and there will be millions of them inside the reactor core. They're very tiny. This is using low enriched uranium, so there's no weapons grade uranium or plutonium involved. It's designed to be a very robust and proliferation proof fuel. It should also hopefully reduce O&M costs and regulatory costs down the road. I can pause here if there's any questions. Okay, next slide please. So the U.S. Army has had nuclear reactors before. So that on the bottom right is a photograph of a mobile nuclear reactor that the Army had in 1958. The Army built 8 nuclear reactors in all. I do want to be clear, though, that our reactor is not a technological descendant from these reactors. This is very old-fashioned technology. But the point is that the Army has done this before. Next slide, please. So why now? In 2016, the Defense Science Board wrote the report that you could see on that slide. It's available on the internet if anyone wants to read it. It said that energy demands have been growing rapidly for the DoD, and energy logistics have also never gone more difficult. We have seen the ability to interdict and slow the transport of fossil fuels across oceans is a huge challenge. And nuclear reactors are in a different position than where they were back in the 1960s. They're now incredibly safe. Advanced nuclear reactors have been operating around the world since 1996. And in addition, we now view climate change as a strategic threat. And so getting off fossil fuels is not just for operational purposes, but it's also for environmental purposes. The country wants to move to net zero carbon by 2050. Next slide, please. So this is a whole of government effort. So while I represent an organization within the DoD, we are working with a lot of other organizations. Notably, the Department of Energy is regulating the prototype reactor. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is a partner, although they are not regulating the reactor. The Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Energy both participated in our NEPA efforts. Our uranium comes from the NNSA, and our fuel line, which we built in Lynchburg, Virginia, has been done jointly with Department of Energy and with NASA. Next slide, please. So we are hoping to build these reactors not just for the DoD, but also for the commercial sector. Nuclear power is going to be crucial to getting a clean grid, and the federal government is trying very hard to make advanced nuclear happen. And the DoD has led the way on advanced nuclear before. The first commercial nuclear reactor was built in 1957 by the US Navy, and it was designed based on what they were working on for an aircraft carrier design. So we can have commercial reactors that follow from us in the same way that commercial reactors followed from those naval reactors in the 1950s. TRISO fuel was designed to be a commercial game changer, and so we would like to help lead that movement. I'll just pause again if there's any questions so far.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so one of those lines says, Pele is designed to be maximally resilient to external hazards and nuclear proliferation. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Sure, so nuclear proliferation refers to uranium or plutonium being diverted to what I would say would be bad means. So, nuclear weapons and things like that. So one of the major concerns that the US government has is making sure that no uranium or plutonium gets diverted. And so one of the advantages of the TRISO coating is rather than having big pieces of uranium or plutonium, you have these very, very tiny, tightly wrapped particles that no one actually knows how to divert. So basically, if a terrorist was looking to get a hold of nuclear material for a nuclear bomb, you couldn't conceive of a more disadvantageous way for them to find uranium than the way that our fuel is. From a safety perspective, there are two benefits to the TRISO fuel. One is that it can withstand incredibly high temperatures. So it means that you don't have the risk of meltdown that you have with older-fashioned reactors. The other benefit, because it's individually encapsulated, it means that even in the case that you somehow break open the reactor, each individual particle contains the fission product gases in it. So it means that you are very unlikely to release a large fraction of the radioactive material inside. You can have a partial release, which is something that is not the way you would see in an old-fashioned reactor. So what it means is that the risk goes away of having these large contamination zones like you have with old-fashioned reactors. When Fukushima or Chernobyl happened, people had to evacuate for miles and miles and miles. But with these new technology, we believe that that would be a physical impossibility. And we don't believe that the DoD would use reactors on installations unless they could be assured that it would be a physical impossibility to have that sort of a disaster. Is that your question, ma'am? Okay. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
So you're saying TRISO is a game changer. Why are you saying that?
So when the Department of Energy was looking to jumpstart advanced reactors about 25 years ago, they were investigating what sort of fuel would be a different new option, both to increase safety and to reduce costs. And what they settled upon was this TRISO fuel. And so they spent several $100 million to make this the fuel of the future. So our organization I work in, we are not a science organization, we are a prototyping organization. So we do not develop nuclear fuel. We are going to take something that's off the shelf and that has already been tested. So this fuel has been qualified, and that's a formal definition according to the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that the regulators have said, yes, we understand that under these conditions this fuel is safe to use, and we're making sure that our design is within the limits of what this fuel is qualified for.
Okay. So you're not able to divulge what's contained in this TRISO fuel?
Oh, no, we absolutely can. So if we go back a few slides, I'll point it out on the picture. So if you could go back. Right there, thank you. Yes, so if you look at that cutaway of, it looks like a cutaway of the Earth, the sphere, right? So the red inner layer is the uranium. There's a green layer right around the red, and that is a carbon material. It basically serves as a sponge. So when gases come off the uranium, they are absorbed in this spongy material. The blue layer around that is a silicon carbide layer, and the silicon carbide is what gives it the strength. And then around that is additional carbon and binding layers so that you can glue it all together. So the key things to remember is that the uranium is inside a sponge that absorbs all of the gases, and then the hard outside shell, which is what allows it to withstand incredibly high temperatures and also to make it rugged and resilient to kinetics.
Okay, so you were talking about uranium-235?
That's right, but it's low enriched, so it's not a. The definition of enrichment is the percentage of uranium that is U-235. So by definition, anything above 20% is highly enriched uranium, and what goes in nuclear warheads or nuclear submarines is much higher than 20%, but we are below 20%, so we are low enriched uranium.
Okay, and then regards to the gas, what kind of gas is it giving off?
Oh boy, what are all the gases that come out of, besides like cesium and strontium? Do you know some of the other ones, John? You put your microphone on. Yeah, so iodine is one. There's a whole bunch that come out.
So you said cesium, what else?
Krypton, xenon.
And these are all radioactive?
They are all radioactive for different lengths of time. So some are radioactive for just a few minutes, some are longer lasting.
Okay, and then what is the total amount of uranium-235? So let's say you have is it a small nuclear reactor?
It's very tiny. So we have less than 200 kilograms of uranium in the entire system.
Okay, and what is the half-life of uranium-235?
So uranium has a half-life of billions of years.
Okay, so that's as long, the radioactivity is going to last billions of years.
The point is it's not radioactive. So it's actually a common misperception of uranium. The uranium itself is actually not harmful. You could hold it in your hand, it's perfectly safe. It's in the soil everywhere, it's in the water.
Yeah, but we're talking about the unstable uranium-235.
So even U-235, U-238, both of those isotopes are not radioactive in any sort of dangerous way. It's perfectly safe.
But when you do a fission reaction, then now we're talking radioactivity.
It's the gases that we were describing. That's what's radioactive, not the uranium.
Correct. Okay, so, well, yeah. I mean, these are highly unstable elements that break down and give off radioactivity. And so you're saying it's going to give off these gases. So what is the capacity of this silicon carbide?
So it has
what can it contain as far as what is its capacity to hold these gases?
So that has been well studied by the Department of Energy and Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So they have done burn-up rates. So within the uranium inside the core, typically you burn a very small percentage of the uranium. And so this AGR triso has been tested to 17% burn-up, which is significantly higher than will occur in the Pele core, and it's been fine. The fuel has also been tested to 1900 degrees Celsius for 300 hours. That's 400 degrees hotter than the melting point of steel. It also withstands that. This is the Cadillac of nuclear fuel. It is very, very resilient and robust, much different from old-fashioned nuclear fuel.
Are you aware there's a paper that came out that talked about that this low-level radioactivity is actually much more dangerous?
So there are very clear nuclear regulatory limits on safety. You know, nuclear radiation is everywhere. When I fly over here, I'm getting about like 1 millisievert per hour of radiation.
No, that wasn't the question. The question was, are you aware of this paper that came out that said that these types of waste is actually much more dangerous? I'm not saying, you know, when you travel on an airplane.
I don't know which paper.
I'm talking about these particular waste products are actually much more dangerous.
So like I said, I don't know which particular paper you're talking about. I'm familiar with the controversy around low-level, low-dose, linear low-dose threshold science. And so, you know, people receive different amounts of radiation depending on where they are. Different parts of the Earth are more radioactive. You know, if you live in Denver, you get 3 times the radiation dose as someone who lives in New York. And there's different beaches in different parts of the world that have high radioactivity. So what the scientists have done is determine what is the limit for safety. And it has been determined that if people stay under 5 rems per year, that there's no detectable increase in harm. Our operators will be well below that limit. So our operators will actually be at about 1/10 of the limit. So we won't even be close to the limit. And realistically, science has not found that even at 5 rems per year is a risk. You actually have to go quite a bit above that. So we should be several orders of magnitude below what's risky. The analogy I use is that I will get more radiation dose flying back and forth to Idaho during the year than my operators will get from operating the reactor.
Okay, you talk about operators. What about the people living here for many, many years to come?
So the operators will be the ones
how
who...
quickly are you going to transfer out these operators?
So how often the operators work or how many years is a decision that the DoD would make, but the limits are set by the operators because they're the ones who are closest to the system. So what you do with a system like this is you actually have limits for the workers and then limits for the public. And the limits for the public are another factor of 10 lower. And it's for that very reason you're describing, ma'am, that you do not, the public could in theory be sitting there 365 days a year for the rest of their life. And they don't have radiation dosimeters. And so for that reason, the rules are even stricter for them to make sure that there's no possibility that they could be
Are you
receiving
familiar
harm.
with our history here on Guam, sir?
Yeah, I'm somewhat.
You heard about the radiation fallout that reached Guam.
I'm sure there has been. There were some
and
horrific
so we're not
nuclear
talking
bomb
about
tests.
your usual radiation exposure here. So
Yes.
before you talk about what is safe and what is traditional levels, I think you really need to think about the history of this island and the Pacific.
So the sort of nuclear bomb testing you're describing is now illegal for the reasons you're describing because it is harmful to people. So that's not allowed anymore.
But the thing is, the radiation still exists today. Mm-hmm. So I can't believe that you're trying to make the claims that it's safe in a community that has suffered for so many years regarding radiation exposure, and many of our people have died from this. So I'm just, you're making it sound like it's totally safe, but here we're seeing academic papers saying that it isn't.
So there's nothing you can do that's perfectly safe. The airplane I take home.
We're talking
crashed.
radiation, sir.
I understand. There's all sorts of risks of anything that you do, and all you can do is minimize the risk. Nuclear is the safest form of energy that exists, as it is today. The fuel farms that are outside, those can blow up and kill people. Anything could happen.
Okay, so
And
you're
you
saying
wanna
it's safe enough to put in your living room?
Well, as long as you're at the distance allowed by the regulatory limits. So I would be perfectly safe. I'd much rather be living near a nuclear reactor than near a fuel farm. The fuel farms get in the water, they pollute the water. It just recently happened in Hawaii where the fuel farms leaked into the water supply. I'd much rather be near a nuclear reactor. I grew up near one in New York, near Indian Point.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to also introduce Senator Roy Kanata also arrived, and Senator Frank Blas, if you could raise your hand, Senator. That's Senator Frank Blas. Senator Telo Taitui is here, and Senator Will Parkinson just came in. So Senator Taitui, you're recognized.
Great, so if we can go back.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi.
Sorry.
Sorry. Apologize for being late, but I was listening on the way over here from the very beginning of this, and the question was talking about the actually the mechanism itself. And a lot of times when you have nuclear reactors like we're dealing right now in Japan, the nuclear reactor to the wastewater that's coming from that. So with this reactor, what is the waste that will it produce, and how will you dispose of this waste?
Yeah, so a couple parts of that. So one is there is no meaningful wastewater coming out of Fukushima. That was a Chinese propaganda story that's untethered from science. I appreciate that the U.S.
Can you talk directly into the mic?
Yeah, sorry.
please?
So I appreciate that the U.S. ambassador to Japan recently went to Fukushima and had sushi to make the point that the water is perfectly safe there. But anyway, as regards to the nuclear waste, one thing is that we would guarantee is that anything that we take in, we would take home. The DoD would not tolerate leaving nuclear waste behind on any local location, whether it's Guam or anywhere else. So anything that we take, it's going to stay inside a box. That box will stay sealed. It will never open in the field, and it will be brought home. We would never tolerate uranium or any other radioactive material outside a sealed box.
When the waste that it's produced and it's put in a box, where does it go?
So we would have a depot somewhere in the United States that would handle it. So for our prototype, we're doing it at Idaho National Laboratory. Idaho has a long history of nuclear reactors. They have all the facilities necessary to handle that. There are several other facilities around the United States that also have those capabilities. Most of them are Department of Energy laboratories. So I would think most likely it would be a Department of Energy laboratory, but that's a decision that would have to be made at a later date. But it would have to be someplace that is able to handle high levels of radiation. And that's not something that a local, whether it's an island or Alaska or anywhere else, would have the capability to handle.
And what's the technology right now? Has it, you know, you're talking about how it's so much better than the old-fashioned nuclear reactors, and now you've come up with this new technology, and now you're taking this waste and putting it in an area that, what kind of study or advancements have you had on that so that there's no accidents happening there?
So nuclear waste has been handled in the United States for almost 80 years now. There has never been an incident where anybody's been harmed. It's the only form of waste where every gram is accounted for. Every gram is stored and protected, as opposed to pretty much anything else you encounter in your life where most of the waste ends up in waterways or in trash heaps or who knows where, dumped on poorer countries. So if, you know, one of my big concerns is waste and trying to reduce all sorts of waste around the globe, and that's one of the reasons I'm a champion of nuclear. I think it has the least risky waste of any form of energy or really anything else.
But it builds up its stockpiles, you know, this waste.
So if you take all the waste ever created in the United States to produce 20% of our electric grid over the last 60 years, it all fits inside a single football stadium. It's an incredibly tiny amount. So for our Pele reactor, our core is about this big, and that's enough to offset over 3 million gallons of diesel fuel. It's incredibly tiny amounts of waste we're talking about. You can power a human's entire life with the equivalent of 1 soda can of uranium. So yes, the waste is a concern, but because you could track every gram of it, that's what's beautiful, as opposed to other forms of energy where you have metric tons of waste that has to get dumped somewhere. And might get into drinking water, who knows what.
What is the worst case scenario if there's been an accident on this power
So
generation
these reactors
nuclear?
are designed to be passively safe. So it means that in the worst case scenario, it will naturally shut itself off. There's no need of any external assistance. So when you look at reactors in the past, like Fukushima, say, the safety is provided by redundancy. So if something breaks, then something else kicks in. If that breaks, then something else kicks in, et cetera. But if you lose all your safety systems at once, because, say, an earthquake and a tsunami hit simultaneously, you now no longer have your safety systems. So what this next generation is meant to be is what's called passively safe. And what we mean by passively safe is I don't need power, I don't need operators to do anything. The physics of the core will shut itself down without any of the fuel melting. So that's why we use the phrase passively safe.
Okay, and last question, Speaker. This reactor is supposed to be housed on a boat, correct?
No. So, well, the prototype, all we're doing right now is we're building a prototype, and that prototype will be on land in Idaho. That's all we're doing right now.
Okay.
And then we're just trying to provide the information to the Department of Defense that they can make decisions in the future about whether they want to buy more nuclear reactors, and if so, how and where. So no decisions have been made of what might come in the future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Lujan.
Thank you. And welcome to Guam, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Here in Guam, we have the LA-class subs.
Mm-hmm.
They have, of course, a nuclear reactor in those subs. How would you compare their nuclear reactor and the uranium in those subs compared to Treso? And again, are they the older design versus...
Well,
I'm asking out of ignorance.
I would say that, well, first of all, I would say that the nuclear submarines are currently the gold standard of nuclear reactors. They are incredibly complex, and their performance is incredible. And what we're trying to meet is a different need. They are trying to, obviously safety is their top priority, as it's our top priority, but after safety, their top priority is performance. Whereas for us, we're not going to have a whole team of naval reactors trained people at our reactor. So it needs to be, as described, passively safe. I don't need operators to take action to save the system. There are several other differences. One is that a naval reactor uses highly enriched uranium. So it uses the same sort of uranium that you might put in a nuclear warhead. Whereas for us, we use low enriched uranium. Another difference is that a naval submarine puts out a lot more power than we do. So it's a much bigger core with a lot more uranium than we do. We're building what we call a micro reactor.
Sure.
It's much smaller.
Yeah.
Those are the main differences.
And the reason why I was asking this is because we already have nuclear power here, basically.
Yes.
And likewise, the LA class subs are nuclear powered. They have uranium. They also house nuclear warheads.
That's right.
So again, when we look at the scale of danger, absolutely, the LA class will be a lot more dangerous in that sense, and they're the first target, basically, of any.
I'm not going to speak for our naval friends.
No.
I'll let you take that quote, Senator.
I understand. But I'm just talking in the sense of safety, and of course, nuclear in the past have always had this, bad connotation, of course. Of course, Fukushima and all the other reactors, I think in Russia, I think it was. And so, how much has the technology changed from back then, from what has given nuclear the bad name, to where we're at this point?
Yeah, so I do think that one of the big differences is that if you look at the commercial nuclear reactors that exist in the United States, those designs, for the most part, were designed in the 1960s. And so it's not really that one thing has dramatically changed, but look at anything. Look at airplanes or your car or your television. A lot of things have gotten a lot more advanced since the 1960s. Sure. So just in general, there's been a lot of learning, and I think that has helped make things safer.
No, and one of the reasons why I'm asking this, because I think it was a couple of weeks ago that we had a public hearing in here with the folks from the PUC. And one of the things from Canada is down the line, again, we have limited land space here, and we definitely have to come to reality whether we're going to go into a incinerator type of situation just because of the limitations of land we have, and it's got to be faced at some point or another, again. And likewise, even with fossil fuel, we have to face, again, reality at some point. Maybe it's not going to be us that will be facing it, but folks that will come after us are going to face it, and at some point, nuclear is going to come to the forefront. And if that's the leading technology right now and transitioning, you said you guys are not just doing this for the Department of Defense, but also for commercial use. And so let me ask you, so for these, in the commercial side of things, these nuclear power plants that are being decommissioned are the ones that maybe are being built with this technology?
Yeah, so the Department of Energy is currently pursuing several designs to try to make advanced reactors happen. There's a big effort to allow this next generation nuclear to happen. You're probably aware that the White House has recently committed to tripling the amount of nuclear energy that the United States produces by 2050 in order to meet the net zero goals. And so they're pursuing several technologies. I would say that TRISO is the most well-financed option that they're pursuing, but they're also pursuing molten salt reactors. They're pursuing a couple other things. They're heat pipe reactors. And so the Department of Energy is putting billions of dollars right now into trying to help these commercial advanced reactors come to be for the reasons you described, sir.
Okay, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Burnett, did you have questions?
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask, so I was doing my little bit of reading, and the Pele reactors, they generate, was it 5 megawatts?
1 to 5 megawatts is what we say, yeah.
So what would be the anticipated uses of these micro-reactors on Guam?
Well, it hasn't been designed for Guam specifically, so it's not designed for...
Hold on a second there, sir, because we had a briefing, and I think it was last year. And so what I found interesting was, since the inception of this technology and the media reports on it, Guam has always been mentioned. I'm looking at this story from 2022, and they're talking about the Pentagon building these nuclear microreactors to power far-flung bases, and I don't think it gets any more far-flung than Guam. And then I also saw in Air and Space Forces magazine that there's a push by lawmakers to get more nuclear microreactors into Indo-PACOM, and that's us, right? So I find it interesting that a lot of the literature and the media reports and the things that we've been tracking in the nation's capital indicate that nuclear microreactors on Guam seems to be more realistic than what we're hearing from you.
So when you're looking for an asset like this, right, the microreactor is designed for resiliency of small-scale systems. So you're looking at things that's just a couple megawatts that absolutely has to have power, and it makes the most sense in places where the current fossil fuel logistics are the most challenged. So at a high level, that broadly means Arctic locations and island locations. And so, yeah, that says Indo-PACOM, right? That's what Indo-PACOM is. It's Alaska and it's islands. But there are a number of islands in the Pacific that we are looking at. So it's not just Guam. I mean, for the reason you're saying, the media hears far-flung islands with military bases, they think of Guam. But as you know, there's others.
I've seen other literature where Guam was mentioned, right?
Yeah, I will say you're not hearing it from me. I don't ever call out specific islands when I talk, but I can't control what newspaper writers conclude.
So are you able to tell us what these 1 to 5 megawatt nuclear microreactors would power? Would it be the missile defense?
So it's not being designed for the missile defense system that's being designed for Guam. What it really, if you have something in general in the 1 to 5 megawatt range for the DoD, the sort of applications that make a lot of sense are things like hospitals, data centers, communication links, radar systems, things that are power hungry, things that have to have reliable power.
I understand what you're talking about when you're saying the technology is safe, but I think there's a wild card factor that's at play here on Guam, and that is that we are consistently under the threat of China. I mean, they have a Guam killer missile, and so we talk about how safe these nuclear microreactors are. I don't know if you're taking into account that we could be struck by a missile, and then so these microreactors are about that big, right?
Well, the uranium part is.
Right, yeah.
It's
so
surrounded by a lot of shielding.
There's pellets in these things,
Yeah.
right? Encapsulated pellets. And so I had read a report that had talked about the risk of any type of accident. But I'm just thinking of a strike, a missile
Sure.
strike, hits one of these microreactors, thing explodes. You've got all these, how many encapsulated micro pellets of uranium are inside the nuclear microreactor?
Yeah, so there's going to be millions of tiny pellets.
So millions of tiny pellets flying all over the place. To me, that's the worst case scenario, right?
You're right. You are right. The worst case scenario would be if those pellets get out. And so our concern from the very start has been that, because we work for the DoD, right? I'm not working for a commercial company. And so our priority from the start has been to ensure that that can't happen. And so the design from the very beginning, not just the design, but also the concept of operations for what the shielding you put around it, and also the concept for where you would deploy it, would all be driven by those concerns, and to ensure that in no way can the pellets get out of the reactor. And so if the DoD felt that the risks that threaten a location would be powerful enough and threatening enough that that could happen, my guess is the DoD would not deploy to those locations.
That's your guess.
I can't speak for the entire Department of Defense. I could just tell you what I advise DoD senior leaders, and that's my advice to them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Any other questions on this part? We're still on page 8 of the PowerPoint. If not, then please.
I have a couple more
Yeah,
slides,
please
and then we
proceed.
can.
Yeah,
Yep.
please
Okay.
proceed.
Yeah. So there's a couple of points in this slide. So as I described, the nuclear reactors are 20% of the U.S. electric grid, but those reactors are old. We have built one new non-naval nuclear reactor from scratch since 1978, and the second one is under construction and is going to turn on very soon. But in comparison, the Chinese have 21 under construction right now. The Indians have 8. We're even losing to countries like Turkey and Bangladesh. And so this has been an issue that has been plaguing the United States for the last few years, and that's why there's this big concerted effort to turn this around, to make real reactors happen, not PowerPoint slides, but actual reactors that meet all the safety qualifications we think they can. And this is really what Project Pele has been tasked to do, to be the tip of that spear. Next slide, please. So this slide is a couple months old, but what it says here is still correct as of January 2024, which says that where we're now is we're making the final design decisions. We are processing fuel, and we are purchasing long lead hardware. And the task here is to finalize the design and get approval from the regulator. The next step, which we hope to begin this summer, will be to start assembling the reactor. And that will happen in Virginia, in Lynchburg, Virginia. After that is done, which we're currently hoping will be mid-2025, we will deliver the reactor to Idaho. Once it gets to Idaho, it will be fueled, and it will be prepared for operation. And then after that, it will go through an operation readiness review, and it will be turned on. And we'll execute all the tests we think we need to demonstrate that the reactor is working the way that we think it should. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide of the deck, and it's really just talking about what our goals are for this program. It's not just to build one reactor, but it's to hopefully build a system that the DoD wants to use. And the DoD, in order for that to be the case, there are several things that have to get done. One is we have to enforce quality in the supply chain. You might have heard of, industrial grade or military grade, but I can assure you that nuclear grade is the highest level of quality that's necessary. We also have to develop a training program that's underway to ensure that our operators can run this thing. We have to figure out, what is the doctrine, what is, how many people exactly we're going to use, what facilities will this operate out of, et cetera. And this has to be cost efficient. The DoD is not going to transition this if this is going to significantly increase the cost of electricity for them. So all those things have to come together to make a good decision. And like I said, this decision is in the future. The DoD has to decide in the next couple of years if they're going to build more reactors. And that's going to be a decision that will be made with a lot of thought and with a lot of agencies weighing in. So part of that is to understand what would be the best applications. We're spending a lot of time. We have a team that is going around studying different locations. I've visited a few myself, but we've had over 100 different locations that have been at least studied in one way, so that the DoD can make the decision that, yes, if we do decide to buy more, what would be the first 10? What would be the lowest hanging fruit? What would be the best places to put this? And that will allow the DoD to make the most educated decision possible. So that's the end of my slide deck, and I really appreciate the time, and I'm happy to take more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that last goal then the reason that you are here on Guam, is to advise them whether Guam is a good place to have these microreactors?
So the question, what we're going to tell them is not a yes or no, Guam is a good place. What we're going to tell them is everything that we've learned. So it's not just what is your current electricity prices and what are your current risks, but also what are the political and cultural concerns. We would not advise putting these reactors anywhere that doesn't want them. If the overwhelming majority of the population says we don't want them here, then I would advise the DoD to acquiesce to that. But there are a lot of places that do want them. So this is all part of the analysis that we provide to them, and eventually someone will tabulate all those up in an Excel spreadsheet and decide what the best places are.
So what are you studying on Guam in particular?
All sorts of things. We've been trying to learn not just what the power uses are here, but what their challenges are. So for instance, we knew before we came here that corrosion is a major concern. Now nuclear is well placed to handle corrosion because the box is sealed. We're not going to have moving parts outside the system. That's one of the things that makes like wind power not work very well here. And there are other concerns here. We know that digging into the soil is a concern here. So we want to avoid systems that have to dig into the soil. Obviously, there are a lot of historical sensitivities due to bad things that were done in the past. And we have those same challenges in Idaho, where we're going now. In the same thing, we're back in the 1950s. People didn't care so much about safety, and they did bad things and created radiological spills and harmed people, and so we're sensitive to that. We understand that this is now the 21st century. We don't behave like that anymore. We have a more open process. In the 1960s, the DoD put nuclear reactors in places without telling them that the nuclear reactors were there. Whereas now, before we went to Idaho, we spent several years engaging with the local government, the local tribal authorities, the local officials, hearing from the local population to make sure that they were all bought in. And our advice to the DoD would be to do the same thing with any of these reactors. Before you put them anywhere, whether it's Guam or anywhere else, spend time engaging with the local government, the local officials, to understand their issues and concerns. Maybe it's that they would like to have a nuclear reactor, but they don't want it here, they'd rather it over there. And those are all things that are really useful for us to know. So, we think that this is what we call consent-based siting, a good approach for nuclear in the 21st century.
So you're conducting that study. How are you doing that? Who are you asking about regarding the sensitivities or the best place to put those things on Guam?
Well, we've been trying to talk to everyone we can down here. So we've been talking to the military authorities, but we also talked to the governor. We spent some time talking to the media. We're talking to you. We talked to the Guam Power Authority. We talked to the Utilities Commission. We're trying to hear from as many people as we can. And we've also, we're keeping our door open so that we can continue to hear from as many people. We're open to what local people have to say. And the same thing we did in Idaho. We had an email address and people could just contact us if they had concerns.
All right. Will there be, that is considered the formal study that will be reported
So this is an internal DoD study, so we are not at the point yet that, like, there's no NEPA going on because there are no plans yet to do anything. So this is nothing formal in public. This has been something that the Army has asked for. And then for Guam, we've been asked by Congress to do a study, and so we're going to provide that back to Congress as requested.
Oh, okay. So this study that you're here for is pursuant to a request by Congress.
It's both.
And it will include your assessment of the sensitivities of the people of Guam?
Among other things, yes.
All right, yeah. I'm just asking because, yeah, if you're meeting only with, the media, we're here kind of to listen as well. This is the first I'm hearing some of these things, so for you to hear my opinion on it is kind of a little early. After, I'm just hearing your plans right now, and I don't know what kind of uses do you intend or are potentially available for Guam with this type of technology?
So like I said, I don't think there's any Guam-specific uses, but anywhere that just needs reliable power. So like I was mentioning before, hospitals or data centers, communication centers, radar stations, things that are very heavy energy draws.
What about the military? Where did they plan to use it?
Well, these are our recommendations for what would be good uses for the military. Those are things that the military, all those things are the most power-hungry things that the military does.
All right. So what is your preliminary assessment of what the good uses for Guam would be?
Well, like I said, it's not our job to start to pick out specific locations. That's too further than we are at this stage. So we're really just trying to hear. And I will say that we'd be happy to leave an open line. And if there's certainly any people that you think that we should hear from that we're not hearing from, I'd be happy. It's about 24 hours for me to get here, so it's hard to get here in person. But I'm happy to take phone calls and talk to anyone that you think that we should talk to. So we're not we're limited by who we could talk to in 1 week, but we're certainly happy to hear from anyone that you think that we should hear from.
All right. Actually, we do have some people in the public who want to join. I didn't allow them to join, but I'd like to invite them in if that's okay with you. But one more question is the commercial use. So it says on the bottom of that last slide, the whole of government decision on future of nuclear power must consider both military and commercial uses. And I don't know, I guess, are you also assessing the commercial use on Guam?
So that's not for me to decide because I don't work for a commercial company, but I can tell you that all the nuclear companies that we work with are all considering commercial applications. I would say that most likely applications are not for islands. The kind of applications commercially for microreactors tend to be things like mining and drilling and data centers. Those are probably the lowest hanging fruits, like companies like Microsoft and some mining and drilling companies have shown interest. So that's probably the more likely, but I can't speak for all these companies.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to open up for questions. Senator Lujan?
Thank you. Sir, how much water would you be using to operate these reactors?
So these are not water-based reactors, so there would be no water flowing through them.
Okay, as opposed to the old type of reactors?
That's right.
Okay, so you won't be disposing of any water and all that? Okay.
Yes, so you might have some water that is outside the system to sit in, like, just to provide extra shielding, but there would be no flowing water, and any water that we use, there are very strict EPA limits to be able to leave it behind, and as a requirement, we have to be within those limits, so it'd be safe drinking water.
Okay, so the water that you will be using won't have any...
It won't go inside the reactor.
Okay, and there won't be any contaminants then? I mean, contaminants?
No, so by rule, anything that is radioactive, we have to take home with us. We can't leave it behind.
Okay. The other thing is, you said these type of microreactors were designed for islands, usually? And what else? And for what purposes again?
So, with a nuclear reactor in general, the bigger the reactor, it will be a little bit cheaper per unit energy. So these smaller reactors are necessarily a little bit more expensive per unit energy. So they're not designed to power large cities or countries. Okay. They're designed for really high value assets where you are already paying high prices for energy. So the logical uses for those tend to be Arctic locations. We were up in Alaska a few months ago, and there are places that receive all their fuel once per year. They get a coal barge once a year, and that's all they get. So places like that potentially make a lot of sense. And then also islands that are, again, difficult to get fossil fuels to. Those are kind of the most logical places for a microreactor.
Okay. Well, one of the things, again, in the terms of in military thought here as well is, again, we're at the tip of the spear, and of course the China, North Korea, and whoever else is with them, is all against us, basically. But I can see the military may be interested in something like this, and you say, the capacity to be able to get fossil fuel in, and at what rate? I mean, should we get an attack? I'm saying, even myself, I'm saying, if we're under attack, Honolulu as well, and the West Coast, how are we going to get our ammunition in to Guam? And so likewise, I'm sure the question would be fuel.
Yes.
As well. So I guess maybe the military is looking at the longer term as well. I mean, military has a mission. They're prepared for war, as opposed to us. I mean, that's what they do. That's what the military is. Okay. They protect our Constitution, but they're anything but they're a dictator, basically. Basically, that's what it is, right? But that being said, I can see. Again, their reasoning wanting this because of, again, the sources to be able to get, fuel, ammunition into these places that are critical for protection of the island and the nation as well.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll add is, all the folks that we met with on island, the military has a job, but the primary job on the island is to defend the island.
Sure, no, I understand that completely. Let me ask you this too, because, I was in the legislature in the first thought of the military buildup when the Marines were moving out of Okinawa, and we visited Okinawa at the time with former Lieutenant Governor and actually a sitting Senator, Senator Joanne Brown was with us when we went to Okinawa as well. To see the situation over there, and what it would be like out here as well. But now I lost my train of thought. Talking about that. All right. But that being said, back then, when the military was looking to again have this buildup and the Marines to come out here. They looked, of course, the power grid, okay? They looked at the power grid. And at that time, they said, hey, we're probably going to segregate our power because there was, first, there was inconsistent power, okay? There was, brownouts, there were load shedding, something we have, again, right now. It was dirty power. It was dirty power. We may have solved the dirty power, but we're back to the load shedding. I'm just wondering, again, if in the military mind that they can move to segregation of their power.
Well, yeah.
No, I know,
Yeah.
but I'm saying because I've heard this before. This is something that they put in front of us at that time, that because we had dirty power and inconsistent power, that they would move to segregation. And so we may have, I don't know, if we have clean power now, but we still have inconsistent power. And there's one thing that I know that the military will need is consistent power. And so, again, in Congress asking you to look at Guam and maybe recommend, do you guys make recommendations or whatever, that they may be looking at the segregation of power. I mean, if I were a military mind, I would be thinking that. I definitely would be thinking that. I sit in the committee on power, and that's one of the things that I would be thinking of course. If my mission was here to defend, and I have inconsistent power, I definitely want to make sure that I have consistent power, and how best can I accomplish that? So
Yeah.
I know it's not on your mind, but it may be another above your pay grade.
Yeah, it's definitely an above my pay grade question.
Absolutely.
I will also just to emphasize that these are very small systems, and so they're not designed to power even a whole military base. They're designed to power specific assets.
No, I'm sure of that. But you guys can build a bigger one, right? If asked?
We could.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator. Senator Barnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think Senator Lujan was trying to touch on this, and I've read a little bit about the non-portable nuclear microreactors. And are we anticipating any of those types of technology being used on Guam? And is it connected in any way to your current visit?
So, again, I work for the DoD, not a commercial company, but there are certainly several commercial companies trying to build their first reactor as well. We think they're generally a bit behind where we are. We are the tip of the spear, as I said. So, maybe in the latter part of this decade, some of those will come online as well. But those will also just be in the contiguous 48 states. But I know, when we met with Guam Power Authority, they said, hey, is it possible that commercial nuclear companies might have something that they can offer? And we said, well, maybe in a few years. I don't think they're quite there yet, but maybe in a few years. But, that would be something I can't really predict necessarily.
Can you talk a little bit about after you submit your report and you make whatever recommendations and use of the Pele microreactors is green-lighted on Guam, what is the process then for public engagement, comment, approval, if any?
So I can't speak to what might happen in the future, but I can speak to what we've already done for the prototype. And so for Idaho, we actually started with a big NEPA process. We considered not just Idaho, we also considered Oak Ridge, and even before that, we researched other sites. And then once we started to narrow down on Idaho, in addition to the required public hearings that are the standard part of NEPA, we also did a lot of in-person engagements, and we particularly focused on the Shoshone-Bannock tribes because those are historically, culturally important lands to them, and it's also, we're going to be right on top of their aquifer. We're going to be right on top of the drinking water that the tribes drink. And so it's really important that we talk to them early and understand if they had any concerns. And in the end, it turned out that their biggest concerns were disturbance of historic cultural items that might be discovered if you dig. And so they recommended a location that they thought would have lower risk of that happening, which we accepted their suggestion. We've also agreed to have our workers go through cultural sensitivity that the tribe would run. And there's a process in place that in case while we're doing work, we happen to come across some cultural artifact, there's a process to handle that. And all that came out of the local engagement that we had. So while I can't talk to what the DoD may or may not do in the future, what I would recommend is that they follow the same sort of process that we did. Like I said, the phraseology now is consent-based siting. It's just not good to try to fight the local population. You want them to work with you, and you want them to advise you on how to proceed.
Yeah, I think our situation's a little different because of our political status. I'm not sure if we have the political ability to provide a check and balance on the process that, say, a state would. So that's, I guess, the concern I had. I know you met with the media yesterday, and I'm just going to read back one of the sound bites. Specific locations that are culturally sensitive, the drinking water is a concern, corrosion is a big concern to anything that's metallic on the island. I'd say these are some of the big issues we gathered from being here. Considering the cultural and political issues, is this a place that wants nuclear power, or is this a place that doesn't? In the modern day, the DoD is going to want to know that the local population, for the most part, is okay with something like this. They're not going to try and put it somewhere that doesn't want it. Could you expand on those comments a little?
Sure, it's like what I'm describing now. So, your point about how, well, technically the DoD can do whatever it wants behind its fence. Maybe on a legal technicality that's true, but that was also true in Idaho. The Shoshone-Bannock tribes, while those are historical lands, they don't currently control the lands. In theory, we could have told them to pound sand and done what we wanted, but we felt that it was important that we not do that we not try to win on some sort of technicality, that we talk to them early and bring them into the process. And not just that for our own good, but we also think it benefits the project because they might have some local knowledge that would say, hey, that's not a great place for a nuclear reactor, it'd be better over here. We want to know that. So this is what our recommendation is to DoD leadership, that don't try to win on a technicality. to make sure to talk to the local population and get buy-in. And if not, there are other places that do want these systems. So don't fight uphill in a Sisyphean battle against the local population that doesn't want it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Senator Brown?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Certainly, good afternoon and welcome to Guam.
Thank you.
I do appreciate the information. I understand that you're probably you can only talk to the expertise that you have as to why you were brought out here, and it's just, for us from our end, just a little skeptical because DOD does not have a very good history on Guam with regards to how it's handled disposal of what we would consider chemicals and other things that have not been so good to our environment historically since the war and all up into the 70s, almost into the 1980s. There's still areas on Guam that have been set aside that have been remediated but not fully cleaned, and the work continues, and certainly there's been a concerted effort after the fact to address it, but you're dealing with a population, as Senator Sabina had brought up, that has been adversely impacted. I mean, the whole issue of the nuclear fallout from the testing in the Marshall Islands, the high levels of cancer that our people, for such a small population, have gone through and continue to go through. So there's a certain degree of concern, obviously, on our part. We certainly recognize in our region the growing threat to China in particular. A few years ago, it was North Korea. They're still there. But, it's strange. We have U.S. policy where we continue to trade with China. We're one of their biggest customers. We continue to pay them to build their military up. And at the other end, we're trying to catch up and see who's going to win that war. And that's the concern. So, I understand the need, obviously, the tremendous advantage that having the use of this can bring. But, there's certainly a skepticism simply because, is it tried and true and how effective would it be? And, you might have these systems that if they're just operating fine, but what are they going to do under attack and what impact will that have? And what, which form of death are we going to get and from whom? And so that's certainly a challenge for us in looking at these issues and in moving forward. We realize the technology. At some point, even though we certainly need to know these things, our enemy is sitting watching exactly what we're doing, what we're talking about, what we're building, where we're building it, how we're building it. So I don't know also does that give us an advantage, but I appreciate the information. Of course, we're skeptical, at least I am. I understand Idaho. We might be looking at building this in Idaho and experimenting with this here and see how it comes out, but I think we're all kind of the opinion there's got to be an ultimate reason as to why you're here, in particular in Guam, briefing us on this. And we're not going to be surprised if that's the agenda down the road, simply because of where we're at in the world and the dynamics of what's happening. But I appreciate your expertise. You've got an impressive resume here in terms of your background and the work you do, and I'm sure from your vantage point, you're advocating something you've worked with and you believe in. It's just the other dynamics that go with it, certainly, that we on this side, who unfortunately, because of our history, have been subject to some of the challenges with DOD. While we're very good partners and very, very, very patriotic, it's that history, unfortunately, that provides us a degree of skepticism that we have with regards to DOD's activities.
Ma'am, I totally understand. If the DOD was coming to where I lived and was, bringing some new technology that had not previously been in the area, I would be skeptical as well. And particularly with what you described, the historical, the nuclear bomb tests and the fallout and all the bad things that caused, I totally understand, or I can't understand, but I can understand that it's something I don't understand, that's a challenge. And what I would maybe ask is, we've brought up a few things. I obviously brought up things like corrosion issues and digging and the temperature and not wanting to be hit. And we've also brought up issues as the nuclear fallout in the past. I would suggest, is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you think I should be including in this study? We're all ears, and is there anything else you think that we should add to that list?
Well, no, I appreciate that. I think definitely the concern of our history and where we're at is going to play a big factor. We understand DOD is going to do what they're going to do on their side of the fence, but again, the health and welfare of the community, we're trying to ultimately save our lives. That's the bottom line. That's, I'm sure, the whole reason for the work and investment that's been put in the very project that you're working on, is to address that. But for us, it's almost which poison pill do we take? Because one way or the other, is it going to be an advantage moving forward, or are we going to find out down the road that there are going to be issues with it that can have adverse harm on our our people and our environment because we've been subjugated to it. Where else in other places, of course, there might be areas in the United States where some of these things have been stored that are issues, but for here, and if we were to take a bunch of little pins and put them on the island of Guam and look at all the areas where contaminants have been found, we're going to be surprised to see that. I spent 14 years on the Anderson Restoration Advisory Board since the early 1990s. Being part of the community engagement and making decisions and prioritizing these areas of cleanup. And it's not a simple process. It's some areas the technology is not there, or the cost of what it would cost to mitigate, or potential dangers of what it would cost to mitigate in some cases are so high that we have to simply remediate and study and test and observe for the next 30, 40, 50 years and on. So it's that challenge, certainly, that's the environment that you're walking into. Ultimately, of course, we want to ensure that we're going to be here to be able to live and thrive, and our family and our children are going to be able to continue to grow, and that we're going to be in a safe part of the world. But the political dynamics are shifting very quickly, and the agendas of others are shifting very quickly, and we see that. And those threats are growing every day. So, it's how do you make that balance where we can protect the lives and welfare of our people, and at the same time, ensure that we have the capability of doing that.
Yeah, ma'am, I will tell you that I worked in nuclear before I worked in defense. So it's not that I'm someone who worked at the Pentagon who was handed this program. I've been interested in nuclear, and I can tell you most people who are interested in nuclear, who do this, who have a passion for this, do this because they're passionate typically about environmentalism. They view nuclear as so much cleaner than the fossil fuel alternative. Every year, thousands of people die from fossil fuel, either directly, coal, mining collapses to breathing the air, millions of asthma cases, not to mention the risk to climate change, and to try to get off of that. And that is really what drives most people who want to do nuclear power. We visualize a future where we can move past fossil fuel to a grid that is nuclear and solar and wind and hydro and maybe geothermal, and maybe fusion will come around, who knows. But to be able to work towards a world without fossil fuels at some point in our lifetime, hopefully.
I think it's just, again, it's a history in other parts of the world where there have been incidents that have happened that's what we know. And, certainly the upgrades and improvement of technology granted, I think we can all recognize the importance of that. But it's just the whole idea of nuclear. We don't look at it in a positive way because of the history and what we've heard, what we've seen other people experience. I mean, it's just it's how do you get past that, and how do you get that awareness that indeed, if this is indeed a clean energy and a clean fuel, it's going to take quite some time to change that mindset that's been there and what we've had to grow up with and experience, to change and say this is a better alternative to meet the desired objectives of what we're looking at. But again, I thank you for your time and providing us insight with regards to the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Speaker. So there was a EIS done for the construction and demonstration of a prototype for mobile microreactors. And so we were never a part of this process. How much further is this going, or what's the timeline for the EIS? Is there going to be multiple, is Guam going to be able to weigh in on this, because now we are, you're coming to us, and is it possible to insert our opinions or our testimony?
So to be clear, we're just doing a study, so there are no plans. If at some point in the future someone made a decision that they wanted to move a nuclear reactor to Guam, then there would be a complete NEPA process. But that is not happening at this time, so there's no NEPA. We performed a full NEPA for the prototype, for the work that we are doing, and that encompasses the activity that we are doing at Virginia and Idaho and everywhere in between. So that's what's encompassed in our current NEPA. I can assure you that if the DoD at some point, many years from now, decides that they do want to bring a reactor to Guam, then they would go through the full NEPA process at that time. And there would be plenty of opportunity for local weighing in.
Okay, so who was invited to these scoping meetings for the prototypes?
So because they were in Idaho, we held those scoping hearings in Idaho.
So this is all Idaho related?
That's correct.
Okay, the other thing is licensing.
Mm-hmm.
What is the status of licensing for a Nuclear Regulatory Commission? There was a mention about bypassing.
So there's no bypassing. So within the federal government, there are 3 different agencies that have the authority to regulate nuclear reactors. A purely commercial reactor is regulated by the NRC. The Department of Energy regulates Department of Energy activities, and then the Department of Defense can regulate Department of Defense activities. So we have the option to be regulated by the Department of Defense. However, we made the decision that the Department of Defense does not really have sufficient regulatory capability yet, and so it would be easier and safer to go with another regulatory agency. There is law that exists that allows Department of Defense prototypes to be regulated by the Department of Energy. That's a pre-existing law that exists, and so we took advantage of that. So we're regulated by the Department of Energy. It's not that we're bypassing the NRC, it's that we're not allowed to be regulated by the NRC, because the NRC only regulates commercial activity.
So you basically volunteered to have DOE be the regulatory agency.
So the Secretary of Energy decided to regulate us. So there's a process by which the Secretary of Energy can authorize that activity, and the Secretary of Energy did authorize this.
Okay.
It's not my decision.
So what are the parameters for Department of Defense to be the sole regulator of these micro-nuclear reactors?
So the regulatory processes that the DoD or the DOE or the NRC use are extraordinarily similar. Their definitions of what makes the material qualified, what the safety requirements are very similar. There's minor procedural differences, but they're awfully similar.
But then you just said just a minute ago that you didn't quite have the regulatory capacity.
The DoD does not yet have the staff necessary, and they haven't worked it out. So one thing people don't realize is that the nuclear Navy is both DoD and DOE, and the people who actually regulate the nuclear Navy are Department of Energy employees, not Department of Defense employees. So the Department of Defense in and of itself just has not regulated nuclear reactors since the 1960s. And so because of that, it's taking time to staff that up. And so for a prototype, it just made more sense to go with the more established Department of Energy process.
Is this something DOD is working towards getting, I guess, autonomy as far as regulatory staff? Is this the initiative?
So there are existing regulations. So back in the 1960s, when the Army regulated reactors, there was a part of the Army Regulatory Code is called 50-7 is the part of the Army regulations that cover that. So those regulations are already in place. What we've been doing in the last few years has been working to upgrade those regulations so that in the case that the Army does decide, if they decide in a few years from now that they do want nuclear reactors, that the regulatory process is already in place. We want to make sure that they're already ready to go. However, the DoD is not going to do this in a vacuum. They are leveraging very heavily the same team at the Department of Energy that has been supporting us, and there would be a lot of Department of Energy employees and Department of Energy laboratory employees who would be a part of that. It would not be DoD acting in a silo.
Okay, when you're talking about silo, would the communities, let's say different, like say Guam, can we be a part of that process? Looking over these draft regulations, to what extent can Guam be a part of that process?
So the formal process that Guam would be a part of, or any location would be a part of that a nuclear reactor be at, is the NEPA process. There are processes for public hearings, but like I said, my recommendation is to not do the bare minimum. My recommendation is to go and seek out additional local input. It's important that the local population feels safe and comfortable with what you're doing, and I don't feel like hiding things from local population helps. The Department of Defense can seem big, bad, and scary. If you have a concern, who do you call? What's the phone number for the Pentagon, right? I don't know. So having people who you can talk to and have those local engagements, I think, are crucial. So my recommendation is always to go beyond the minimum and to do additional seeking out of local population.
So, we're very familiar that the federal laws come with the regulations, and normally there's a call out for the public to weigh in. So is the general public allowed to weigh in regulation drafting and finalizing? Are there opportunities for the general public, the U.S.?
So I'm not a Army lawyer, and I don't know exactly how Army regulations are finalized, so I really can't speak to that, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Okay. Would you be able to find that out for us?
I would be happy to find out.
Okay. In the EIS, there was a mention about security concerns for U.S. territories. Can you comment on that? It was a comment by Michael Keller.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the comment?
In the EIS, there was for the construction of and demonstration of a prototype for mobile microreactors. There were security concerns for U.S. territories. Can you explain what those security concerns were?
Well, anytime you're doing anything involving nuclear material, you always take security very seriously. And so we have a multi-layered defense process for where we're doing at Idaho. We're going to have a fenced-off area. We're also going to have security cameras, and as well as additional protections that Idaho does. Idaho has a very strong security team. I'd encourage you to go visit and see what they do out there. It's very impressive.
It was specific to U.S. territories, though.
So our NEPA only covers the activities that we're doing, which only covers Virginia and Idaho and the transit in between. So we are not dealing with anything else to do with U.S. territories.
Okay. I guess I would probably send you that information because there was specific reference to the U.S. territories during the EIS process. So I just wanted to make sure there was a response to that.
So every question that we got during the NEPA process, if it was relevant to what we were doing, we answered it. Some of the questions, I don't know that one in particular, so I can't speak to it. This is several years ago, so I don't remember we got a lot of comments. But I can tell you that some comments were ruled as being not directly relevant to the action, but all that is documented and should be included on the NEPA page that we have on the internet.
Okay, so going back to the site selection process, what are the parameters and timeframes?
For site selection of what?
Your prototype testing.
So we did several years of work before we decided on the final location. And like I said, that included a lot of, I went around, I visited locations around the country, and there were a number of reasons why we ended up deciding Idaho. That's all detailed in the NEPA.
Can you give us a brief rundown of that?
So there were several reasons why we liked Idaho for the prototype. One was that for a prototype, there are more uncertainties than for an nth of a kind. And so there's a chance that you might want to take the system apart, or you might have, it might break, it might not work the way you want. And so having a lot of the trained personnel and hot cells and things like that on site was very valuable. Another benefit Idaho had is they had a very elaborate microgrid, because you want to be able to do microgrid testing. So having the microgrid there was a big plus. There were a few other things that don't come to the tip of my head right now.
So microgrid was a plus. Basically, they had a
Yes.
really good microgrid.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was accessible in case they have to take it apart.
Yeah, there's a lot of expertise there in handling nuclear material, radiological stuff. So I was describing earlier that we would never open this reactor in a far-flung place like a Pacific Island or Alaska because the personnel on site are not trained to handle radioactive material. But a place like Idaho National Laboratory is trained. They do have the equipment. They do have the trained personnel. So that would be the sort of place that we would be comfortable taking the reactor apart.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier that they had an aquifer. Mm-hmm. Was the site over the aquifer?
So the whole territory where they do all the test reactors in Idaho is above a large aquifer, yes.
Okay, and you took it apart over an aquifer?
So there's no risk to the aquifer based on what we're doing. We've done thorough analysis. There will be no impact to the water. That was part of the NEPA process.
Okay, so what happens if there was damage to the aquifer? What were the mitigation plans, contingent plans, if there was
there's no risk to the water. So you need basically a few feet of dirt between you and the reactor, and there's like 1,000 feet of dirt. It's not even close. There's no risk whatsoever. All you can do is do the physics and give yourself margins of errors, and it is what it is.
So there wasn't any contingent plan then? Is that what you're saying?
The contingency plans are based on what are realistic things that could actually happen.
Okay.
And so that's what we're concerned about.
What about mitigation plans? Should there be some sort of contamination?
So those are not risks to the aquifer. So the contingency would be if there were a terrorist attack and someone blew it up with a bomb. And so we are considering that, and that is a contingency that we have to consider. But we can't consider what happens if an alien spacecraft hits it. We have to be based on what are actual realistic things that could happen.
So mitigation, so was there anything in the NEPA that talked about mitigation, and did you respond to that? How did you address that?
Yeah, so we addressed in quite a lot of detail what we would do in the case of an earthquake or a flood or terror attack. These are all things that we do take into account because while those are low probability, they're not impossible, and so we do have to account for that.
Okay. And so what was your mitigation plan?
So we have a process in place that no matter what happens in any of those scenarios, there would be no harm to the humans nearby. If you have to take the system apart, we have a place at Idaho National Laboratory that we can take the damaged reactor to take it apart. But out in the field, it will not harm anybody.
Okay, and then how far was this location for the facility where you took it apart from the actual testing?
I don't know, a few miles.
Okay.
Idaho National Laboratory is a huge piece of property. It's more than 4 times the size of Guam.
Okay. The other question I have is the waste management. Is there a permitted site for spent nuclear fuel?
So in the United States, there is a permanent site that's called WIP. It's in New Mexico. However, the Pele fuel will not be going there. So what we are doing with test reactors like Pele for now is we can store it on in Department of Energy laboratories for 1,000 years. And hopefully at some point in the next 1,000 years, someone decides where they want to put their permanent repository. It's a political issue, not an engineering one.
What are the regulations for, so that's an interim storage facility, is that correct?
Yeah, I would consider it an interim storage facility, that's
So
right.
what are the regulations for an interim storage facility for spent nuclear fuel?
So you have to have it encased in concrete to the point that someone can stand next to the concrete and hug it and have no physical harm of any kind. It's incredibly encapsulated and there's no risk. There's actually there was a beautiful viral picture that went viral a few months ago of a nuclear activist who was about 8 months pregnant hugging a used fuel cask, just to demonstrate that there's no risk.
Okay, but interim-wise, what's the length of time that something could be stored? Is it indefinite?
1,000 years?
1,000 years?
Something like that. So hopefully at some point in the next 1,000 years, Congress passes a law and decides where they're going to put it.
And how much can be stored in that?
So, like I said, all the nuclear waste ever created in the United States could fit inside a single football stadium. So the amount that we're going to create in this project or anything else is going to be minuscule.
Okay, in regards to, so Guam, you know, Guam is a very, we have issues with shipping. We don't have any facility to handle hazardous waste. And not only that, we have other waste. You know, we talked about open detonation here, open burning, and then the fact that a lot of these wastes, in addition to the munitions that are coming into Guam, there has to be a certain amount of, I think we're running out of space for all of these things, really. And to be able to add this on to another, you know, this, I guess, the risks, I think these are, you know, I don't see how this can all.
So, Senator, what you're describing is actually precisely why nuclear power is such a wonderful option for an island. Because if I were to build a wind turbine on this island, I can declare bankruptcy and walk away, and you're stuck with the waste. But with nuclear power, you're not allowed to do that. You have to have the entire plan of how it's going to leave the island before you even show up. There can be no process where it gets just left behind because someone declares a bankruptcy or changes their mind. So this is the one form of waste that you know will be off the island, as opposed to anything else.
Okay, so I beg to disagree with that statement. You know, I thought you were providing more objective information rather than, you know, a PR campaign to promote how safe nuclear waste is, especially to our community that has really experienced a lot of harms coming from nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Yeah, I find that it's very, I think, arrogant. It's arrogant that you're here promoting this, considering our history.
So
that wasn't a question, sir.
I'm here because I can understand the difference between nuclear energy and nuclear bombs. And what you're describing are nuclear bombs, which I'm not a fan of and I'm not promoting. What we're describing, just because it has the word nuclear in it, does not make it the same thing. An analogy I often give is if the first time anyone experienced gasoline was watching napalm be dropped on natives, no one would be comfortable putting it in their gas tank. So the fact that nuclear energy has been tied to nuclear bombs is unfortunate from a PR perspective, but they are very, very different things. And so I'm very sorry about the things that were done in the past with nuclear bombs. That has nothing to do with anything that we're doing here.
Okay, I think that's my question for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Senator Kidanta?
Thank you,
Senator
Madam
Kidanta?
Speaker.
No questions? Senator Taitigui?
Thank you. And thank you so much for enduring these questions. I appreciate it. When you talked about fabricating the Pele fuel, you know, this fabrication that needs to be done, what is the cost compared to what we spend on fossil fuels today?
Well, so the fuel, it's, you know, the cost of a reactor all in is not just the fuel, it's also everything else, right? That affects the total price. The hope is that the nuclear reactors will not add to the cost of electricity. As I mentioned on the slide, the DoD is not going to take on these reactors if it's going to meaningfully increase the cost of electricity. What the exact price will end up being is hard to predict at this time, but it's certainly been one of our big concerns is to keep these cost effective.
Okay. Based on the second to last slide that you showed us, there's a section that says review all significant design decisions with INL. What is INL? Sorry.
Idaho National Laboratory.
Idaho
National Laboratory.
And the DOE safety officials.
Yes.
Department of Energy, right?
Right. So the way that it works from a regulatory perspective is that Idaho National Laboratory approves the design, and then the final safety approval goes up to the Secretary of Energy.
Okay. So it's showing here that this is something being done by DOD, and you know, pushing this fabrication of the reactor, and then. Prior to that, you showed a slide of those countries that have current reactors, the same type of reactors that we're talking about today. Is that true?
It's a whole gamut of reactors that are under construction now.
Similar to, are they using the Pele fuel?
Most of them are not, actually. So most reactors under construction around the world are still, in fact, I bet most of those are Russian designs, so they're actually fairly old-fashioned.
Oh, okay. So the one that has U.S., where you have it, you know, kind of highlighted in blue, why again is that highlighted in blue?
Oh, just so people could see where the U.S. is?
Oh, so one reactor,
Yes,
right? And that one reactor is from a commercial and not a DOD reactor?
That's right. It's called the Vogel reactor. It's in Georgia, in the state of Georgia.
Okay, and that reactor is not using the technology you're bringing today. So you're just, okay, so this technology is, right now, there's 4 stages that you have indicated here. As of October 2023, we're still in stage 1 of that page, right? So there's about 4 other stages to go before you finalize this. How long is that going to take?
So our hope is that this reactor will turn on approximately 2 years from today. I will add that we will not be the first reactors to be powered by TRISO fuel. So while it's a new fuel and most reactors not using it, we are certainly not the first. The Chinese just turned on a reactor using TRISO fuel last year.
TRISO fuel? Is that what you're calling it?
Yes.
TRISO?
TRISO, yes.
And that is basically your fabrication of Pele fuel, right?
Yeah, so they're making it themselves in China, but it's the same concept, same design.
Okay, so we have 2 names for this kind of type of fuel, right?
Oh, no, TRISO is the correct name. Was I using a different term? I'm sorry.
Yeah, because you're talking about fabricating Pele fuel, right?
So TRISO is what the fuel is called,
okay,
and then
TRISO.
Pele is the name of the reactor.
Okay, so here it says, you know, to fabricate Pele fuel, so I'm just figuring
So what I mean is the fuel specifically to go in the Pele core, right? Because we're making fuel on that line, but some of it has been set aside that this is going in the Pele, so we're calling that the Pele fuel, but the variant of fuel it is TRISO.
Earlier, I asked, first time I asked you a question about what's the worst case scenario, you know, and you said that the reactor would just shut down. But actually, the worst case scenario is if, you know, we had a terrorist come here and blow up the facility. What is the radius of damage?
So, you know, we're having to calculate that. It would depend in part on exactly what they did to it. But we don't believe that the DoD would allow these systems if there needed to be an evacuation of a mile. You know, we believe that it would be no more than a couple hundred yards at worst.
Okay, so it's not going to be a huge explosion.
No, there's no mushroom clouds and fallout are not things associated with these sorts of systems. Those are nuclear bomb. It's a completely different concept, yeah.
Even with this type of fuel, You know, it has no reaction to heat. You mentioned that actually earlier.
Yes.
It has no reaction to high heat. So
Yeah,
if they're going to hit us, they're going to hit us with a missile that has a lot of heat and explode. I think so you probably just a missile alone is going to cause more damage than what would happen if the reactor was hit by this missile.
That's right. Yeah, if a missile that big goes off, it's going to be a bad day for a couple hundred yards, regardless of what it hits.
How long are you going to be here for?
I'm just here for this week.
Just this week? And then okay, is there something that you tell the public right now how they can provide their input and testimonies to you? Is there a 1-800 number? Is there a Guam number? Or is there an email that they can send?
Well, so far our NEPA process, we had an email address. And while that was designed for the NEPA that we did, we still have that email address. We'd be happy to read those emails.
Can you say it online right now, that email address?
Yeah, so if you just Google DoD microreactor NEPA, there's a website for it. It's like microreactor EIS dot something, and on there's an email address.
Okay. I mean, and that's all you're going to be receiving all these emails. You're going to be able to respond to it, et cetera, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to promise I respond to every email. I mean, like all the rest of you, I get 300 emails a day, and sometimes you miss some, but we will certainly do our best to respond to the public.
Okay, and when are you going to end this this research or collection of data?
We intend to deliver to the Army within the next few months, but it's really based on what they need from us. So this is an iterative process where we talk to senior leadership, and then they ask us if they need more.
Does it say on the website when the drop dead line for any comments?
There's no formal deadline here. This is just, what I'm saying is this is outside a formal process. This is just us trying to, we believe it's in our own interest to hear from the public. So we welcome
and of course, the best way to hear from the public is to provide an avenue for them to contact you, to give you their opinions, and then actually know the deadline date too, so they can do their own research. So it's safe to assume that, Doc, that they would, best to put it in with the next 3 weeks, 2 weeks?
I mean, I'm going to be building Pele for the next 2 years. Okay. So if someone sends me an email on that time, I'll read it.
Okay, thank you. Also, did DOD mention, I mean, since you're working for DOD, the plan is to put this on federal lands, right?
That's right.
Okay. Did you ever make any reference to Guam Power Authority that whatever power is that's left over, or they have extra power to give out, that's storing, that they would sell it to Guam?
That's a decision that wouldn't be made by me. So that would be a theoretical future decision. I mean, the Guam Power Authority seems to have interest in nuclear power in general, but whether it's a Pele system or some other system, that would have to be their decision.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Just wanted to confirm, so you met with the governor, you said, the media yesterday, of course, was announced, the senators today, and then you mentioned GPA. Are there any other agencies that you've met on Guam?
The Public Utilities Commission.
PUC? All right, and then any other planned meetings that you have?
Not with civilians, no.
All right. Yeah.
But I certainly welcome it. So, my offer to you, ma'am, is I'm happy to take any suggestions and to talk to groups. One thing the governor suggested was maybe at some point in the future, giving a talk at the university. I'm open to all sorts of ideas like that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to engage.
I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and would we be able to see your report? First, you said it was, I heard you say it's for the Army, but I thought you told me that it's for Congress, so.
We're doing both.
Okay.
So the Congress has only asked us about Guam, but it's part of a larger Army study that's for Army internal decision-making.
And what is Congress's question about Guam?
Oh, the exact wording of the NDA, I don't recall.
Pardon?
I don't recall the exact wording, but it's the language that came out over the summer from the NDA. So I don't recall the exact wording.
Is it for use in the missile defense program?
I don't believe it calls out that particular program, no.
And so the design that has been approved now that you're going to move forward with, what is it planned to withstand, or what's it going to be designed to withstand? What terrorist attacks? Like you're saying, a missile, it cannot withstand, but I guess
ma'am,
what would we, if we had
yeah.
one here, what would we worry about? What would break it open?
Well, it's going to depend in part on how you protect it. So the DoD has a lot of experience at protecting valuable assets. You know, if you've been up to Anderson Air Force Base, you might have noticed there's protection that goes around the planes when they're not being used. So it comes down to how much protection do you want to put around the system.
All right, so what about
yeah.
its design?
So the design, what really adds the strength of design is that there's a lot of shielding around the system. And that shielding is very, very hard material. And so that material can withstand quite a lot. This is not something that's
I know, but
easily
you're
broken.
like the engineer, I mean, you designed this, right? What is it designed to withstand by
It's
itself?
designed to be as strong as possible. And then what you do from that point, once you design the reactor first, then you analyze what the most serious threats are. And we've done that. And that answers
You've done that, right?
That work has been done. And then once you understand what those serious threats are, then you design your shielding to withstand that. So what you would do before you would deploy it somewhere is you'd understand what are the worst threats there, and then design your shielding to withstand that. It would be unique to the location.
All right, and what is Guam's?
I haven't done that analysis for Guam. We've tried to understand just in general what is most likely to break the system. I can't talk about that. That's a classified answer, but I can tell you that we've done a lot of thought and a lot of work on this.
All right, is your report to the Army going to be classified, or are we going to be able to see it?
I would imagine it would be classified, but this is really just for the Army to make decisions. So the point is that if the Army decides that they're going to build reactors, that decision would then be public, and then they would list a number of locations, and then they would narrow those locations down. And the narrowing process would involve local engagement. So the Army is not going to choose any locations without first engaging with the local population.
I know that that's the ideal, and that you say you're recommending to them that they don't put it anywhere where there is no consent. That hasn't not been our experience at all. And in fact, I think we were entertaining a bill that said no nuclear reactors on Guam, and the admiral of the JRM came out with a legal opinion that said they could do whatever they want behind the base or behind the fence.
So I'm not going to speak for JRM, but I can tell you that I have a lot of engagements with not only Army senior leaders, but also the political leadership in the country. The Secretary of Energy has been very clear about this. She's very clear that she believes in consent-based siting. Historically, the Department of Energy had not put a lot of thought. What you're describing, ma'am, is correct. There had not been a lot of thought about what the local population thought. If you look at the situation of Yucca Mountain in Nevada, that was chosen against the will of the people, and it worked out very badly for them. And so I think the lesson that everyone's taken from it is that consent-based siting works out for everybody. Because if the local population doesn't want it, it's not going to be a good time for anybody.
All right, thank you. So it looks like Congress, I'm just reading an article in the Stars and Stripes that says they want to know about nuclear reactors supplementing power on Guam. And is that it? Say it.
Yeah, but I mean, you can tell us what the brief is. It's basically to study like the feasibility of the use of this technology, right, to power assets on the bases.
On the basis, power assets on the basis?
Yeah, we will respond to any questions that Congress asks of us. I mean, I get asked to a lot of congressional reports, I'll tell you.
Sure.
I got assigned 4 reports in the NDA. This is just one of them. It's this is a hot topic. We get asked a lot of questions, and we're always responsive.
All right, great. Well, I very much appreciate your willingness to meet with us and to answer our questions. And I really do hope that we're offering our place, I guess, if you need a forum or to invite the public to answer their questions. I'm sure the earlier you do that, the more at ease they will be. Senator Barnett, yes?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to point out there's a big difference between Guam and Idaho, right? What may be safe in Idaho, I don't think translates necessarily to Guam, because Idaho is not the tip of the spear. We are the tip of the spear. And so any discussion about the use of nuclear microreactors and the safety, I think, doesn't include the threat of an attack. I mean, I don't think you've been able to answer the question in a way that satisfies, well, not me, for sure. And I don't think that you test the technology in that fashion. I mean, do you guys conduct tests with these nuclear microreactors and strike them with a missile and see what happens, or is this just laboratory guesstimation?
So first of all, I'll agree with you, Senator. Guam is more complicated than Idaho, which is why I'm doing the first one in Idaho and not in Guam. You're right. In terms of kinetic testing, we are doing kinetic testing. I can't describe exactly what we're going to be doing, but we are going to be blowing some stuff up, I will tell you, in Idaho. So all that data is going to go into the analysis that the Army is going to do. So we are taking it very seriously, and we're not just trusting computer models. We're going to actually do some explosive testing.
Can you speak more to you said you do a lot of reports for Congress. These reports, when you give them, are they, in your estimation, being given to entities that have already decided a course of action? Because I'm, again, just looking at all the literature about this technology, it seems like Alaska, Guam, these austere bases were almost pre-selected for this technology because of, you know, the various factors that make it attractive to be used here, right? So I just wonder if you're doing this report and it's really just you know, going through the motions, and that the Army has already decided that, yes, we're going to use this technology.
So I can tell you two things. One is that, you know, I'm sure you guys watch the news just like we do, and Congress doesn't agree about a lot of stuff, so there's certainly disagreement in any room that we're in. However, I will tell you that this is something that's awfully popular, and generally, what happens is not that senators go, oh, this is great technology, let's bring it to Guam. They often say, no, how do you get it to my state? We've had a lot of senators who want these systems in their state, and so we hear that all the time. And so, you know, certainly before anyone would have any conversations about Guam, like I said, we would communicate, you know, with Congressman Moylan and the governor and anybody else so I totally understand what you're saying, and I will try to be as respectful of that as I can.
I hope so, because I mean, the congressman was quoted in this story from Stars and Stripes as saying, this is the first we are reading of any discussions associated with nuclear reactors to supplement power on Guam. And I think that's very telling when our lone representative to the Congress is clueless about this technology and the efforts to implement it here.
So you make a great point, and I actually met with Congressman Moylan this morning, and one of the things he asked is that we communicate with him in advance so he no longer has to read about this in the newspaper, and I said, absolutely, we will make that promise to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So you also met with Congressman Moylan here
That's
on
right.
Guam. All right. Senator Lujan has a couple more questions.
Yeah. Thank you. I think a couple of these questions have been answered already, but let me just make sure. Again, what's the soonest that you think these microreactors will be, will you start deploying these?
I think the earliest that the DoD would deploy reactors anywhere is 2030, but I don't believe Guam would be the first location. So Guam or any other Pacific island would be later.
Okay. Okay, likewise, it was talked about, now, of course, we know the threat that we are facing here in the Indo-Pac area here. Should this microwave take a direct hit, how long would the radiation last then?
So it's a very different situation from nuclear bombs. So in a nuclear bomb, what causes that long-lasting radiation is fallout. And so fallout is actual physical material, radioactive material that's being left behind, and that could last for decades. But that's not the case for us. So for us, the dangerous stuff that would be released is a gas, and you're just basically waiting for that gas to dissipate. So probably just a few hours or days. Okay. For a few hundred yards, that's it.
Okay. Now let me ask this question as well. Is that obviously, I mean, of course, Congress had asked you to, again, do the study and the Army had asked you to come out here as well, or you guys come out on your own to gather more information. Knowing that, again, the Indo-Pac area is the tip of the spear, basically us being the tip of the spear. In regards to that, I mean, obviously, the microreactors that you would build for commercial entities will be very different than what you would design for military use and defense. Knowing that, then you would be looking at, okay, whatever may be decided, okay, and hasn't been decided yet, whatever be decided, then you're looking at the Pele system that would be, if instituted here or here in Guam, that it would be part of a defense of Guam.
So the specific defense of Guam, that work that's underway now, there are no plans for Pele to be associated with that. So at this time, there are no plans, and I don't anticipate that there will be.
Okay. But should there be plans in the future, then the commercial grade stuff that you have will be very different than what you would be putting together for a, should that happen, a defense for Guam, should you be the company or that is...
Yes, so the Pele system is designed to be particularly hardened to deal with all the issues that have been brought up here, right? We understand that a military system could be attacked. A commercial company is not going to be as worried about that, so it will be a different system. So anywhere that you have a commercial system, it's going to be a different design.
Sure. Yeah, okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, Situs Masip, that means thank you on Guam, and thank you for being here and assessing. And I hope that you will conduct a town hall, and I'm offering our public hearing room anytime while you're here, and even tomorrow or this evening, whatever time you'd like. I'm sure the public would like to hear directly and be able to ask their questions as well.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker.
Thank you.